The last time this bill was presented at the floor of the National Assembly, there were tough stands and hard lines, characterized by the glaring absence of members in the House. Their hard positions presented to Parliament a remarkable show of defiance and shifting party loyalties right at the noses of their party heads. Nearly a decade since the Kenyan 2010 Constitution was promulgated, why is it taking too long to implement the two-third gender rule? But first, youth serving organizations are setting up presentation on their recommendations to the National Youth Council of 2019, this in form of a bill, and that forms the basis of our discussion this morning. A very good morning to you from wherever you are watching us, and welcome to Midweek, the show that sets to put its agenda as matters and things that are of interest to you. I am Abubakar Abdullahi. We'll start with this discussion on youth empowerment, but we'll be getting to the other discussion on the two-third gender rule a little bit later. Joining me in studio to kick off this discussion are Mbuki Mburi, who is from Power 254, and Wilkista Aduma, a consultant on youth activities. Ladies, many thanks for making time for us. It's Women's Wednesday. Little wonder the two panelists are ladies. Let's start from the very genesis of this youth council. The idea of forming a youth council came into effect about 9 years ago, if not more. Its roles clearly stipulated out and well anchored in the National Youth Council Act of 2009. Nearly a decade since it was formed, do you think it's delivering to the aspirations of young people?
It's been now a decade now, but since it was formed, there were a lot of challenges that came into play because the National Youth Council, as much as it was set, by the time it was set up in 2009, and then we had a promulgation of the Constitution in 2010. Mm-hmm. Therefore, there were already contravening laws within itself, within the Act itself. So therefore, it did not allow the National Youth Council to kick off. Those are some of the challenges that came into play. But then there was a lot of also political interference in the formation of the body. Mm-hmm. So therefore, it did not manage to pick up.
Political interference,
yes.
You guess is from which end? From politicians or from?
Yes, at the time there was elections, but then the members of parliament at the time and other political interests at the time did not want the National Youth Council to kick off because this was actually a young people's voice. Mm-hmm. And therefore, as much as there was a stream elections, I mean, all those things happened, but then the politicians did not allow it by not giving it funding. Remember all this, the ministry in charge of the National Youth Council at the time mm-hmm. did not get enough funding to be able to allow the National Youth Council to kick off.
Let me pose the same question to Wilkistan. Nearly a decade now since it was incepted, it came to being the National Youth Council. Do you think it's delivering to the aspirations of young people?
Well, if I may say, the spirit behind having the National Youth Council to act as, the official voice of the young people is one which fosters inclusion and one which has the youth at heart. But as my colleague has mentioned, there has been a lot of, lack of goodwill from political actors around, and due to that and other issues around the same political grouping and organizing, which seemingly looked like what the NYC was doing at the time, mm-hmm. made it impossible for it to deliver its mandate in as much as it's anchored on law and on Article 55B on political, social and economic participation mm-hmm. of the youth. So it hasn't delivered its mandate fully.
Those who pose as though the National Youth Council is a caveat used by, be it the system or otherwise, to show as though the system is working for young people, when in reality it's not.
Well, the spirit behind it is one which fosters, for it's almost as if it wants it to work. But again, I will, just loop in the political organizing aspect of the National Youth Council. Mm-hmm. You realize people who vied for council positions, council members, and won through the ranks right from the ward level. Some of them were able to acquire amass some clout of sorts that gave them political power and that made people in political positions a bit uncomfortable about it. So if you talk about underfunding of the National Youth Council mm-hmm. and it not being able to deliver on its mandate, mm-hmm. it's particularly pegged on the political organizing aspect, which in the amendment we seek, to cure and to address.
At the height of multi-party democracy at the height of Africa's end of colonization. Young people were active in the fight against colonialism, if not young-led organizations were active. Will I be wrong, in my own opinion, to suggest that that seemingly has changed?
I think we need to appreciate the role of young people in any democracy. And the young people are the ones who sort of are able to organize themselves very quickly, and they are able to sort of give the community, or rather give the community the power or the life, just the life of having to address some of these issues. Mm-hmm. If you look at, for example, just political organizing and just the process of democracy in Kenya, young people have really played a big role. Mm-hmm. And we think...
And is it the case that the reflection is in the language that you are using? Young people have played, which is past tense?
Have played and continue to play, I would say. But I think also the reason why the National Youth Council was put in place in 2009 by the Act, it is to also to continue with the spirit, because we want a growing democracy. We do not want a situation where we have maybe a democracy just on paper, but we want a growing democracy that young people can continue, engaging, continue engaging, and also we have a generation that is they know their rights, they know their issues, and they're able to articulate their issues. But when we sort of try and kill the National Youth Council, then we are all over killing the country, because where are these young people going to engage? The National Youth Council gives them a platform to engage politically, economically, and socially. Mm-hmm. So we need to empower the National Youth Council so that we can also have a very empowered generation, and therefore we'll have a very even just in the growth of the country, because then growth also goes back to representation and engagement.
And I'm talking of voice. Let me ask you, Wilkista, this question. Talking of voice and representation, is it a case of the youth in totality who have been part of the representation, or it is the elitist urban youth who are being represented by organizations that many a times rally to be representing youth?
Well,
in your own view, you don't have to specify which organization this is.
I would like to loop in the conversation that also young people have participated in political processes right from, the fight for independence and, the having Kenya into a republic and all that. Mm-hmm. We had the Young Kavirondo Association, Young Kikuyu Association. All these were fueled by youth blood. In the current electoral processes, I can tell you very confidently so that the entire electoral process runs on youth blood, runs on young blood, slogans by youth, mm-hmm. campaigns by youth, mobilizing by youth. So in trying to, sort of negate the youth not having participated per se, it would be false in itself. So we have played a significant role. I don't know if that
and fair enough, we give credit to where the youth have been vocal. The number of youth representation, be it elective or otherwise, has equally increased over the years. There are organizations that are seeking an amendment to the Act of 2009, and this comes through the bill, the National Youth Council Bill of 2019. In a nutshell, yep. I know what it means. I have read the document which I have, which we will interrogate. In a nutshell, can you make the case for the National Youth Council Bill of 2019?
If you look at the 2019 bill, of course tabled by Honorable Ketel, it seeks to sort of kill the election within the National Youth Council. And we are saying that, and of course you asked about representation all the way from the ward level. We do not want a situation where mm-hmm. people just sit aside and decide these people are the ones that can lead young people. Mm-hmm. We want young people to decide the people that they want them to, the people that they want them to lead. So, what we are advocating for is that the election model, we need to come up with a situation where the young people can actually decide the leaders of the leaders of the National Youth Council. And we are proposing to introduce the county youth charters. As you know, that we already have counties that are already forming the National Youth Councils, mm-hmm. The county youth councils. But now we are seeking to have county youth charters that will be sort of be streamlined within the election process, so that young people can feel that this National Youth Council it belongs to them and they have a say. And even we are introducing a situation where we'll have the assembly of the council. So basically, the assembly of the council will sort of be able to oversee the mandates, or rather the implementation, or rather the activities of the council. So we are introducing the perspective of elections.
And you think the formation of these county youth leagues, county youth councils will be of aid to young people?
Yes.
Will it not be a replica of increasing the number of organizations, yet the voices are not heard?
We are not increasing. Remember, we also need to appreciate devolution. The spirit of the Constitution is that these young people, or rather the people in the community, can be able to engage and also feel that they're represented, their issues are represented. So the moment we devolve the county youth councils, I mean, or rather the National Youth Council, to county youth charters, then we'll have more mainstreaming in the county governments as well, because we are looking at the county government also being parts of the county youth chapters, because then we are able to streamline within the ministries of counties as well, and we'll be able to have also young people feel like they're also part of the governance process and also development within the county.
Fair enough. Let me bring Wilkista to the discussion. In 2016, there was a row over the appointment of members to the National Youth Council. Will it be fair to say that it's not as youthful as many try to depict it?
Well, and I'd like to loop in at this point, number one on our 5-point agenda on professionalization of youth work. Because when you talk about youthful and youth, how are we looking at it? Because I think the Constitution is very clear on who is youth, 18 to 35 years. When you exit that bracket, you exit the youth bracket. However, it would be really key to note that when you exit 35 years of age and you've been working within the youth space, that does not negate the fact that you are a resource person in that space.
And is it a case of many at times it being conflated of who a youth is and who a youthful person is?
Yes, but I would not like to take that direction in terms of defining youth and youthful, but I would like for us, as youth and as a nation, to first of all realize that the youth work is becoming a professional space. We already have countries introducing courses on youth in terms of professionalism. So youth and youthful are not the discussion to have on this table. The discussion to have on this table is whether the young person serving is a resource or the youthful person serving is a resource. So it's about the capacity of that person. Are they well equipped to serve in that position that they are called to serve? And do they carry the youth agenda? And are they professionals within the youth space? Yes.
And irrespective of whether they are young or not, if they can serve in this space, you give them a chance?
I believe we should. However, let us not lose sight of the fact that it is very hard for someone who's maybe 80 years old to have a vision of sorts. You understand? So it will need a lot of, for example, if you appoint a 50-year-old to a youthful position, you have he or she around him should have an advisory board that should be youth, and actors who are professional within the youth space, so that he does not lose sight of having the youth at heart, and he does not lose sight of why he's in that position to begin with.
Fair enough. Let's get to the bill itself. Among the many recommendations it has, I'll read the few in parts, and I read and I quote, that the assigned share in the need to restructure and realign the mandate, composition, and operation model operation model of the Council to assure its relevance, effectiveness, and response in the discharge of its power, functions, and as supportive of effort to amend the National Youth Council Act in so far as the amendment supports the realization of their above stated objective. Mind explaining that?
So basically what we are looking at, if you look, and as I mentioned before, the National Youth Council was set up. There was no support at all in terms of structure, coordination, capacity building. And we are saying these are young people. And just to pick up from the point that she was talking about, professionalization of youth work, we need to invest in young people. We need to invest in the National Youth Council so that even while we are talking about youth empowerment, youth education, youth mainstreaming, this body is able to sort of coordinate and be able to allow that different organizations, different youth-serving organizations are able to contribute to this National Youth Council. So that even while we are talking about, for example, representation of young people in boards, for example, we need to have youth voice within different directorates within government. We talked about development partners. How do they engage the government through the National Youth Council? So we need to strengthen the National Youth Council so that while we are talking about youth work, there's a proper channel in which young people are engaged. And in that way, then we are able to strengthen the voice of young people. And we can be able to contribute so much to the development of this country.
And you talk of funding and resources. Part of the recommendations, I read again, is the resource mobilization model for the council to be diversified, to reduce over-reliance on state. Corporate members, for instance, will pay an annual fee to receive their accreditation as members of the constituent assemblies. You want corporate firms?
We are looking at youth-serving organization be part of the National Youth Council. So the way the model initially was envisioned, it was envisioned like a government body. But we want to see this government, as much as it's a government body, we the people who are already in the youth space, working on youth issues, we also need to be part of this National Youth Council so that even while it's making decisions, we can give our technical expertise, we form our committees so that we can also advise on even be able to strengthen it.
And this is a prayer, it's not an obligation that they must do it, is it?
Yes, the youth serving. When we are proposing that we introduce the corporate membership, because the corporate membership then allows us to engage, because we are a stakeholder and we sort of have a voice in the National Youth Council. Remember, we are experts in this engaging young people. So we need to be part of the National Youth Council. And it goes back to resources and funding. As I mentioned before, as it's of current now, only the government is able to fund the National Youth Council. We are looking at also youth-serving organization contributing to sort of a bit of resources to ensure that even while the National Youth Council is receiving small funding from the government, the corporate membership is also contributing so that even this National Youth Council can be able to resource mobilize for bigger funding. And also that bigger funding also trickles down to the young people. So,
Wilkista, going through this bill, the National Youth Council bill 2019, plus the recommendations that are here right in front of me, going through these pages, it seems as though this is a radical change within the organization that is being fronted, which begs the question, what is the problem?
Well, I'd like to answer you by, first of all, broadening this conversation a bit. You realize half of the world's population, which is 7 billion, is youth right now. In 3 generations, 41% of the world's youth are going to be African. So if you're looking at a population of 41% of youth, the world's youth being African, and then bring it home to Kenya, and imagine the number in terms of voting, the voting population, and in terms of young adults within that population are going to be youth. So how are we preparing ourselves for that youth bulge? And how are we as a government, are we as a people, are we as a continent preparing ourselves for harnessing that demographic dividend? So this bill seeks to address futuristically what it envisions the population to look like the next 10, 30, 40, 50 years. So when you talk about the National Youth Council bill and the amendments to it, I wouldn't call it radical. I would call it very practical in envisioning, the future that is to come.
You say it is futuristic. I'm just questioning what is futuristic when you call for reforms on the structure and the coordination, the resource funding. This seems to be the day-to-day activity of the council itself.
You realize in making decisions, people don't sit under a tree and decide, wow, we are going to do this. You don't sit under a tree with Mira and maybe your Coke and decide. The reason why the bill is as is right now, and the reason why we are having amendments to it, is because, first of all, we have to make decisions that are informed. We have to make data-driven decision-making, and that is why I still loop in the population, the demographic dividend, and how we are going to solve that. And that is why I'm calling it futuristic and very responsive. Because one of the reasons why we have policies and laws that are not exactly being implemented or in the implementation fail is because they do not seal the loopholes in the future. They do not envision certain scenarios in the future. So for this particular, bill, we envision that the population is going to change, and we envision that, the working population is going to be youth. The young professionals are going to be youth. The young leaders are going to be youth. So how do we, at this particular point, make sure that we place ourselves very strategically to ensure that when that scenario occurs, we are well prepared for it? Yes.
And we, you mean the organizations, the councils such as these, the authorities?
By we, I mean, first of all, myself as a citizen of this nation, and secondly, myself as a consultant who's worked with very many youth-serving organizations, and thirdly, myself as a member of the consortium that is fronting this bill.
Good. Many a times in this discourse, we also hear of the question of we against them, hawa ni watu wamezeka, hawatuelewi, the systems are not understanding, supposedly young people. Is there any truth to such statements? That there is a disconnect between the generation that has been there and its adaptability to understanding the problems of young people as of now? Is there a disconnect? Let her go first.
Okay, I think there is a disconnect, because if you look at even just the population and just referring to what she was talking about, the young people are the majority. We are the ones who engage in the campaign process, in, all the dirty work of this country. Yet when you go to the representation, it doesn't speak the same. Therefore, it tells there's no intergenerational intentions to ensure that there's a merge. Therefore, if there are no very good intentions to ensure that there's that sort of cross-learning of generations, then there's definitely a gap in terms of how the country will be. And just looking at our country, for example, there were statistics that the average age of people working the public service is 55 years. What does that mean? That there's a very small percentage of young people working in government. So what happens to how will government be run in the next 5 years or in the next decade? That means there's no transition, there's not a proper model in which we are incorporating the younger generation into the system. And therefore, there will be a breakdown. And that's why we are saying the National Youth Council should be there to ensure that there's this mainstreaming, to allow that young people are in these boards, for example. They're in government agencies. They're everywhere, so that there's transition. Otherwise, we'll have a situation where all the older have left, and there are no young people. And then what happens? We are sort of like starting off. So,
Buki, you're pointing fingers to the old. Let me point that finger again to the young people. Some quarters also hold the view that it's young people who don't want to take these positions. They are not fighting enough and fighting hard to grab these positions. Is there any truth to that?
Wow.
But these are statements we hear in this discourse, don't we?
We hear them, but how true are they? There's a danger to having a single story. So the danger in having a single story is that you do not appreciate the stories of all other people around. For myself, and I believe for Mbuki too, we can attest that we have fought for our positions in this space. And at some point, you also mentioned the issue of elitist youth. And I believe, that's a default setting that's now being thrown in to have the youth not sort of merge around issues and feel like some of them are being too elitist. First of all, you should appreciate that any young person that looks, seems, talks, sounds elitist has worked hard to be there. First of all, if you've not gone to school to be that, it means you have studied a lot and researched a lot to be that. So I'd also like just to clear the air on the elitist youth matter. And looping in.
Despite some being in these positions courtesy of their second name, the family they are from, or how deep their pockets are, these are realities that we shouldn't shy from, are they?
Looping in also the conversation on, elder-led programs. I don't want to call them old people. They're elder-led programs, because you realize when you exit 35, you become an elder. So in looping in the elder-led conversation is, we are saying in our recommendations, first of all, build capacity for the young people. The reason why we are saying build capacity for the young people through the National Youth Council is to be able to have young people that can engage on, you know, a very strategic level, a very high level, to be able to sit on the same table with people who are elders and elder-led programs and make you know, make contributions that actually make sense. You understand? And in also looping in the professionalization of youth work. That is why we are not saying we do not want to work with the elders. We are saying let us professionalize the youth work, so that in working with the elders, we know that there are people who are resources within the youth space. It doesn't matter if they are 40, they are 50, but they are resource people within that youth space.
It's good that you're talking of the professionalization of the youth activities and the youth work. It's part of the recommendations of this bill. How will it help, if at all, the youth work is recognized? Will it help in any sense?
Of course. If we sit down and ignore emerging trends, we are stupid as a nation, and we'll be very foolish in making decisions that do not particularly include emerging trends. So youth work is an emerging space. If you look at organizations like IYF, it's not, the managerial level is not 35 and below. Yeah? If you look at senior management, it's not 35 and below. So that alone should tell you that we are moving to another phase where we are having the youth work being a professional space. If you look at, you know, call for applications for consultants around those issues, it doesn't say that you should not be below 35. It calls for a consultant who is, first of all, a resource person within that area. So let us appreciate that the youth work and making it professional will help, even futuristically, looking at the demographic dividend and wanting to harness that as a nation and as a continent. Yes.
And if this is recognized and young people are given a voice that we demand for, I'm part of that age, I guess, what kind of a change do we foresee then? If at all this is idealized, if this is materialized?
Just to add on the professionalization of youth work, I think we need to also appreciate that the youth work it's actually like any other profession. Like, we do not want a health scandal, for example, because we don't have professional doctors and everything. So we need to, first of all, professionalize the youth work and ensure that youth are actually engaged in a very meaningful way. And one of the things that we are advocating in the bill as well is meaningful engagement. Because when you say engagement, you just have forums and, you know, but that is not meaningful engagement. We want young people to be part of the decision-making processes. We want young people to be at the table. So we are talking about meaningful engagement, and that goes back to the professionalization of youth work. So that's what we are advocating for. And maybe, sorry?
In a culture, in a society where age determines a lot of things, on who sits on the table and who doesn't, do you think young people will overcome this age barrier of them being locked out from the table because they are young?
Actually, I want to appreciate some of the cultures in Kenya. If you look at some of the cultures, I do not want to mention them, but there are some cultures that actually appreciate the age set, you know, age group and all those things. So by the fact that those cultures appreciate that these young people have moved from this section to this other section, there are actually some training that they go through. In those trainings, then they are able to sort of, the community sort of give them a certain mandate to go. So in those communities, and if you look at even just in Kenya, those communities do very well in terms of political engagement, because they prepare the young people all the way from when they're young, so that young people can feel that they're actually moving and they're also being appreciated in decision-making process.
And if societies appreciate young people, the societies are moving with young people, training them as they flip over their ages, yet at the national level, this appreciation is not equated. Is it an exercise in futility?
I think it is an exercise. It's an exercise in futility, but we are also saying that other young marginalized communities are also being left out. We cannot grow while other young people are left behind. We are talking about SDGs and leave no one behind. It's a fallacy when we talk about Kenya is a champion of SDGs. Well, we are leaving almost half of the population, in fact, 2/3 of the population behind. So therefore, we need to engage everyone in decision-making process. And I want to appreciate those cultures. And when we are talking about even just the national government, for example, the executive, they need to be very deliberate of engaging each and every one of the person in terms of the decision-making process, in terms of, for example, setting up agendas, for example. We are talking about the Big Four agenda. Who was consulted? Young people consulted in some of these things. And maybe even those the four agenda are not priorities of young people. So we need to ensure that even while we are talking about development agendas, we are involving everyone, leaving no one behind.
Wilkista, for someone who may still be struggling in the need of wanting to know why involve young people, how would you answer such a person?
Wow. First of all, it is enshrined in the Constitution, in Article 55B, to have the youth involved in political, economic, and social, processes. So that's the first reason why you would want to involve any young person, because you'd be contravening the Constitution itself. The second reason why you would want to involve young people is, first of all, let us realize that we are having different generations of young people. There are generations that are younger than myself, that are younger than Buki, that are younger than you. And how do we accommodate them? Because in workspaces right now, we have Generation Y and we have Generation Z. We don't know which other generation is coming up. And all these generations are not homogeneous, you realize.
Labelings that are widely contested, isn't it?
Exactly. So how do we deal with, the dynamics that come with Generation Y, the dynamics that come with Generation Z? And that is the reason why particularly you should involve young people who are workers within the youth space to, first of all, find, amicable solutions to whatever matters may arise in dealing with these generations. Because you realize you will not have productivity if you do not understand your workforce. So this is very basic, very, very basic on anyone who's starting a business, on anyone who owns a multi-million business, on the government itself, in running the economy, and in all the social spaces and in all the political spaces. So you have to appreciate that you may not have insight, in dealing with these different generations, but if you involve professionals in the youth work, you will have an edge, over other governments, over other businesses, and for these things all trickle down to the economy itself and the GDP.
And
so
at
if you do not involve the youth in harness that demographic dividend, you're putting yourself at a position where you're not harnessing a serious resource.
And on that point of the contribution to the larger economic perspective, we equally hear, and these are things that I'm putting forth so that you, the young people, can respond to it. It's not necessarily my view or TV47's view. We equally hear the view that young people are not ready to dirty their hand, to go down and do these jobs. They are selective on where they want to work. Is that a harsh judgment?
I disagree.
It's a harsh judgment.
It's a harsh judgment. And I will tell you why the informal sector is doing so well in Kenya. Because that's where young people are. Because we have already been locked out by the system to be, we've been locked out. And that's why we are trying to figure out, so what next for us? And that's why you'll find that we are trying to, organize ourselves in the informal settlements to earn a living. And we are talking about youth unemployment is so high because there are no proper systems or deliberate efforts to ensure that young people are able to be mainstreamed within the whole system.
And for far too long, and forgive this, for far too long, hasn't the point been that they are not given a chance, young people are not given a chance? Why not the reverse? Why are young people not demanding, creating these opportunities themselves?
We have young people creating, we are talking about innovation. In fact, Kenya is leading in terms of innovation in Africa. And therefore, when you're talking about we are not taking initiative, we are taking initiatives.
One or two is not the equivalence of the number of young people whom we have in the country, is it? The success of one shouldn't be young people are doing this. It is, for instance, Mbuki who's doing this.
I think also we need to appreciate that as much as I might be seen that I'm the one who is leading, there are young people behind it. Sometimes the person who is seen to be shining or who has come up with that innovation, there's so many other people behind it. And I want to say that young people have actually gone out of their way to make a living out of the space that they are in. And that's why the informal sector is growing. And if the government doesn't watch out for that, it's a ticking time bomb. We need to start mainstreaming youth issues in a way that will also benefit the whole country and the whole community.
And also just to loop in, please appreciate that if you have one out of a sample, it means the sample is doing something. If you use research to, have different sample sizes and pick one there, it means a number of young people are doing something. It's just, it's not out there because they are not there yet. But they're actually doing, meaningful engagements and a lot of innovation behind the scenes.
And justifiably on this morning you have made the case of young people, and as we finalize this discussion, I'd love to ask you, how can countries then tap into this potential, this age bracket of young people for economic, social and political prosperity? Wilkesa.
So first of all, for any government that wants to drive, its economic agenda, its social agenda, its political agenda, your workforce is going to be youth. So how do you make sure that when you have that workforce, it's going to work, in the betterment of the society itself, in the betterment of the economy itself? So we have to deliberately plug into, the demographic dividend of young people in building their capacities and in also, organizing them so that you do not have a disgruntled population of young people. So you want them organized, you want them prepared, and you want them ready to build, the economy socially and politically.
I would say we need to change the perspective of young people. I don't know, this country we see young people as a problem, and we are actually a resource. The moment we change the mindset that we are actually a resource, that is when we'll be able to harness the demographic dividend.
And on that change, what will it need to change that narrative, that perspective?
We need to engage young people all the way from the lowest level. Any decision-making processes, young people need to be involved in. So just ensuring that we have very deliberate efforts to ensure that we are leaving no one behind, and also going back to education. I was just looking at the curriculum, for example, in Kenya. It's sort of like a delay process. Like you put in school, go study, and then when you study, there are no jobs, there's no way to go. So we need to invest in some of this education, very deliberate, and I know we can talk about the CBC and all those, the curriculum-based education, but we need to be very deliberate in terms of education that we give to young people. Invest in it, and also invest in skills, so that even while the formal education does not work, we also have skills that we can peg on.
Ladies, thank you for making time for us. Mbuki Mburu from Power 254 and Wilkista Aduma, who is a consultant on youth activities. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you.
Well, it's time for us to take a short break. When we come back from the break, we'll delve deeper into the two-third gender rule and why it has taken nearly a decade for it to be implemented. We'll be back after this break.